My name is Elliot James Callahan, but most people just call me Eli. I am 29 years old and live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a city that rests quietly beside the Susquehanna River. Harrisburg is not as bustling as Philadelphia or as industrial as Pittsburgh, yet it has a quiet charm of its own. Cobblestone streets, old red brick buildings faded by time oak trees, standing tall along narrow roads in the crisp autumn air that lingers longer here than anywhere else. I work as an archivist at the university library, spending my days among books and documents that many have forgotten. I love my work, even if the salary is modest, because the pages of old books tell stories that history has nearly buried. To me, history feels like a great unfinished novel, especially the Cold War, where shadows often carried more weight than armies. But in the eyes of my family, I am nothing but a disappointment. My cousin Jake sneers at family gatherings, reminding me that I'm still living on that pathetic salary. My cousins Emily and Sarah laugh at my quiet life while bragging about European vacations and expensive watches. My father, Thomas Callahan, runs a booming real estate company alongside my uncle Dan, always appearing in expensive suits, dealing in million-dollar contracts and gleaming cars. Their lives are measured in stock values and luxury parties, mine in the turn of a fragile page. At family dinners, while chandeliers glitter overhead and wine flows, I'm the one quietly clearing plates, pouring water, ignored unless they want to mock me. Yet there is one place where I am never the outsider. My grandparents' wooden house rests quietly near the Allegheny Forest. My grandfather, Walter Edmund Callahan. Grandpa Walt was once tall, but time bent his back and turned his hair snow white. He wore threadbare sweaters and old caps, usually with a book or cup of black coffee in his hand. My grandmother Maggie, with her warm eyes and gentle smile, knitted by the fireplace or brewed tea. To me, their home was a haven filled with the smell of damp wood-baked bread and the safety of belonging. While the rest of the family dismissed them as poor and irrelevant, I drove there every weekend with pastries or medicine, listening to Grandpa's stories. His voice was slow, deliberate, weaving tales of soldiers, spies, and secrets buried under dust. I often brought him books about the CIA, the KGB, or espionage operations. He would lean close and whisper that the world was full of secrets, that some people changed history yet were never known. Grandma would pretend to scold him for confusing me, but I knew she loved his stories as much as I did. My mother Susan is the only one in my family who has never mocked me. Quiet, often overshadowed by my father, she holds my hand when no one is looking and tells me I don't need to be like them. She knows what it feels like to live quietly under someone else's shadow. With her, I feel protected in a way my father's wealth could never provide. Life went on like that until one late autumn evening. I visited my grandparents as usual, but Grandpa's eyes were different. As the fire crackled and Grandma went to bed, he leaned closer. His voice, low and serious, asked if there was a secret that could change how you see this entire family. Would you want to know? I tried to laugh it off, but his eyes gleamed in the flickering firelight with a weight I had never seen. He placed his hand on my shoulder and told me I was the only one he trusted. Weeks later, his health began to decline. Pneumonia settled in and he refused to go to the hospital. I stayed overnight more often, helping Grandma cook soup and clean the house, sitting by his side as he spoke less of wars and more of his youth. One evening he whispered that a person can live two lives, one seen by the world and one known only to themselves. His words were like a stone dropped into my chest, creating ripples that would not stop. By Thanksgiving, his cough had worsened, yet none of my father's side of the family visited. Only my mother and I brought food, sharing a quiet meal at their small kitchen table. Grandpa still managed to smile, recalling old holidays when Dad and Uncle Dan fought over pumpkin pie. In his eyes was the distance of someone remembering a world long gone. Winter crept in, and the doctor warned he might not survive the season. I sat by his bed one night as moonlight streamed through the window, silver across his face. He gripped my hand and whispered, "Don't trust what you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." I begged him to explain, but he only squeezed my hand and fell into another coughing fit. Grandma hurried in, signaling me not to press him further, but those words clung to me like frost. In the corner of their living room, I noticed once a small wooden box locked with a padlock. Grandma said it was his and that I should leave it alone. My curiosity burned, but I obeyed. Then, on a cold morning not long after he slipped away, his final words to me were, "I'm proud of you." I sat by his side, tears soaking his hand as the last of his warmth faded. Grandma stroked his hair, whispering that he had loved me more than anyone. The funeral was small and gray, with rain streaking the windows like the sky itself was mourning. My father and Uncle Dan stood in sleek suits, already impatient, while my cousins whispered and scrolled on their phones. Only my mother held my hand. Grandma sat silently gazing at an old black and white photo of Grandpa, her face unreadable. I thought his story had ended there, but in truth it had only begun. A few days after the funeral, the family gathered again, but this time in the office of Harold Steinberg, Grandpa's lawyer. Steinberg was a tall, thin man with silver-rimmed glasses, the kind of person who never wasted a word. His office smelled of polished wood and old paper, lined with shelves of case files and heavy law books. My father sat at the head of the table with the same authority he carried everywhere. Uncle Dan lounged beside him, checking his watch impatiently. My cousins whispered and giggled as though waiting for presents. My mother sat quietly near me, her hands clasped in her lap. Grandma had chosen not to come, saying she trusted Grandpa had done what was right. Steinberg began to read the will in his steady, deliberate voice. Small sums of savings were divided among Dad, Uncle Dan, and the cousins. A few keepsakes went to others. I could hear Jake muttering under his breath, clearly dissatisfied. Emily and Sarah crossed their arms, expecting more. Then Steinberg adjusted his glasses and looked directly at me. To my grandson, Elliot James Callahan, he read, "I leave the old property, number 1417, and $10. The room fell silent before erupting in laughter. Jake slapped the table, choking on his laughter. Emily covered her mouth while Sarah mocked $10. What a joke. Even Uncle Dan smirked. My father didn't laugh, but his eyes held contempt, as if this proved how worthless I was. I sat, frozen confusion pressing down harder than humiliation. Grandpa had loved me more than anyone, so why leave me something so meaningless? Steinberg only nodded at me, offering no further explanation. My cousins continued mocking until the meeting ended, and I walked out into the rain, the weight of that inheritance pulling at my heart. That night I went to see Grandma. She sat knitting by the fire, her face tired but kind as always. I told her about the will, my voice heavy with disappointment. Why would Grandpa leave me just an old property and a $10 bill? She set her knitting aside, placed her frail hands over mine, and whispered, "Your grandfather never did anything without a reason. If he chose you, there is a purpose." Then she left the room and returned with a small brass key tarnished by time. She pressed it into my palm. "He told me once the answers are there. Go to the old house, Eli. You'll find what he wanted you to know." The following weekend, I searched for any reference to property number 1417. After hours online, I found it an abandoned house at 1417 Old River Road, near the Susquehanna River. No one had lived there for decades. My pulse quickened. Could this be the place? I packed my backpack with a flashlight, the brass key, and the $10 bill, then drove out of the city. Old River Road grew lonelier the farther I went. The trees thickened, their bare branches rattling in the cold wind. Finally, I saw it, a sagging wooden house, its windows shattered roof, caved in places, weeds choking the yard. A rusted, "No trespassing" sign dangled from the gate. My chest tightened. I pushed open the creaking door, the smell of rot and mold wrapping around me. Inside the house was a graveyard of dust and broken furniture. I searched every room, lifting rugs, tapping on walls, but found nothing. My hope was fading when I pulled out the $10 bill. Its serial number read J1417, K89632, 1417, the same as the property number. My heart pounded. I paced back toward the fireplace and accidentally caught my heel on a loose floorboard. The hollow thud beneath my shoe jolted me. I dropped to my knees, pried the board free, and uncovered a small metal hatch with a combination lock. My hands shook as I entered the numbers 1417. A soft click broke the silence. The hatch opened. A rotting staircase led down into darkness. The smell of earth and rust drifted upward. I swallowed hard, gripped my flashlight, and descended. The cellar was small, its concrete walls stained with age. In the center stood a wooden table. On it rested a small safe, a metal box, and a stack of dusty papers. I tried the safe, first punching in 1417. Nothing. My eyes returned to the $10 bill. The remaining digits, 8963, glared at me. I entered them, and the lock clicked open. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook, a bundle of documents tied with cord, and a small silver USB drive. My breath came shallow. The notebook was filled with Grandpa's neat handwriting. Names, dates, coded symbols, and maps of Eastern Europe. One page described an operation in Berlin, 1978. A black and white photo was taped inside Grandpa in a suit beside a man in military uniform. Beneath it, scrawled in his hand, were the words, Operation Blue Horizon, CIA. I dropped the book, trembling. My Grandpa Walt, in threadbare sweaters, had been a spy. The documents confirmed it, contracts stamped with government seals describing him as strategic coordinator for European operations between 1974 and 1988. His codename was Falcon. He had coordinated networks of operatives across East Germany, Poland, and Hungary. But the metal box chilled me more. Inside were files labeled with my father's and Uncle Dan's names. Grandpa had tracked them for years, gathering evidence of money laundering, fraudulent charities, and offshore accounts. Among the pages lay a folded letter in his familiar handwriting. Eli, it began. If you are reading this, you have found the cellar. I am sorry for placing this burden on you, but you are the only one I trust. I have lived 2 lives, but the most painful truth is what I discovered about my sons. I found proof of their crimes, money laundering, collusion, fraud. I wanted to stop them, but I could not destroy my own children. So I leave this decision to you. The hard drive contains everything. If you believe they can change, give them a chance. If not, do the right thing. I am proud of you, Eli. Tears blurred the ink as I clutched the letter. Grandpa had been more than a storyteller. He had been a guardian of truth, and now he had entrusted that truth to me. I left the cellar with the notebook, the documents, and the hard drive hidden deep in my backpack. Driving home through the empty roads, I felt as if I had stepped out of one world and into another. The man I thought I knew, the grandfather who told me stories by the fireplace, had lived a secret life as a CIA coordinator during the Cold War. And now, through a single letter, he had placed on me the burden of deciding what to do with the truth about my father and uncle. The next morning at the library, I could not focus on cataloging books or answering students' questions. Every time I glanced at my backpack, I thought of the coded pages and photographs inside. I needed someone who could confirm what I had found. There was one person I trusted, Dr. Leonard Brooks, a professor of history specializing in Cold War intelligence. He often visited the library, and I'd spoken with him about espionage operations before. When I stepped into his cluttered office, he greeted me warmly, his silver hair, untamed glasses slipping down his nose. I laid the leather-bound notebook and several photos on his desk. I found these among my grandfather's things. I said carefully, "Can you help me understand them?" He adjusted his glasses, flipping through the pages. His eyes widened. "Do you realize what this is, Eli? These aren't just notes. These are CIA ciphers, communication diagrams, field maps. The way they're structured, this is authentic intelligence material. And this photograph, Berlin, 1978, Operation Blue Horizon. This operation involved a defection the world thought impossible. Whoever wrote this wasn't just involved, he was running things. My chest tightened. So you think this could be real? Dr. Brooks looked at me gravely. If your grandfather was involved, then he wasn't a bystander. He was Falcon, the coordinator of an entire CIA network in Europe. Eli, this is government-level material. If anyone knows you have it, you could attract the wrong attention. I nodded, my throat dry. I did not tell him about the files implicating my father and uncle. I simply asked him to verify what he could through his contacts at the National Archives. He agreed, but warned me to be careful. Not everyone will want you holding this, Eli. Keep it safe and trust no one. That evening in my apartment, I locked the documents inside my closet and stared at the hard drive. The letter echoed in my mind. If they choose the wrong path, do the right thing. My father and uncle had always seen me as weak and insignificant. Now I held the power to dismantle everything they had built, but I still clung to hope that maybe, just maybe, they would listen if I confronted them. 2 days later, I walked into my father's sleek glass office downtown. Rain streaked the windows as I stepped into the meeting room. My father sat at the head of the table flipping through contracts. Uncle Dan leaned casually against the window, his polished shoes gleaming. Their eyes darkened when they saw me. "What are you doing here, Eli?" Dad asked, his tone sharp with irritation. "I need to talk to both of you about the company and about Grandpa." Uncle Dan chuckled. "Grandpa, what's the point of bringing him up now when he left you $10 in a moldy shack? Let it go." I took a deep breath and placed several documents on the table, just enough to prove I knew the truth. An invoice from the Bright Future charity, mismatched figures, underlined by Grandpa's notes. "These aren't just random papers," I said. "They prove you've been laundering money through the charity, fraudulent contracts, offshore accounts." Grandpa knew. He tracked everything. The room went silent. My father's jaw tightened. Uncle Dan snatched the paper, scanned it, and tossed it back at me. "This is garbage. You have no idea what you're talking about." "I'm not here to accuse you," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "I'm here to give you a chance to stop, to make things right. Grandpa didn't expose you because he couldn't destroy his own sons, but he left this to me, and he told me to do the right thing." My father slammed his fists on the table, his face flushed with rage. "You dare lecture me about what's right? You who sits in a library earning pennies think you can tell me how to run a company? Your grandfather was a fool, and you're following in his footsteps." "They're not fake," I shot back. "I have more. Emails, invoices, proof. If you don't stop, I'll take them public." Uncle Dan sneered, stepping closer. "You think you can threaten us? We'll bury you in lawsuits. You'll lose your job, your reputation. You're nothing, Eli. Nothing." For the first time in my life, I met my father's gaze without looking away. "If you don't stop, I'll expose the truth," I said. My voice shook, but the words burned steady. Their silence was thick with fury. I gathered the documents, stuffed them back into my backpack, and walked out. Rain poured harder as I stepped outside, soaking through my coat, but I didn't care. I had given them their chance, and deep down, I knew they wouldn't change. Back in my apartment, I sat at the table staring at Grandpa's photograph in Berlin. His eyes were sharp, almost alive, as if watching me. He had lived with secrets, but he had never turned his back on the truth. I couldn't either. The night after confronting my father and Uncle Dan, I barely slept. Their voices still rang in my head, full of contempt and threat. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as a danger. I had hoped they might admit their mistakes, but I knew then they would never stop. Grandpa had been right sometimes. What's buried beneath the surface is far darker than anyone wants to believe. I opened my laptop and finally played the video stored on the hard drive. My grandfather's face filled the screen, older, but steady, his voice low yet clear. "Eli," he said, "if you are watching this, then you found what I left behind. I couldn't destroy my sons, but I also couldn't let their crimes go unchecked. I trust you to decide. If they change, give them mercy. But if they refuse, do what I couldn't. Do the right thing." His eyes glistened as he added, "I am proud of you, no matter what you choose." Tears blurred the screen as I sat in the silence of my small apartment. He had carried this burden alone for decades, unable to expose his own sons, but unwilling to let their corruption rot the family completely. Now he had passed that impossible task to me. The following morning, I called Harold Steinberg, the lawyer. I found more. I told him. Evidence, serious evidence. I need your help to get it to the right people. His voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring everything." I spent that night organizing the files, invoices, contracts, Grandpa's notes in the hard drive. My hands shook as I slipped them into my backpack. When morning came, I walked into Steinberg's office with a weight heavier than anything I had ever carried. He listened intently as I laid everything out. Grandpa's past as Falcon the Hidden Seller, the crimes of my father and uncle. He reviewed each paper with absolute focus, his expression grave. "Are you certain you want to do this, Eli?" he asked, his eyes fixed on mine. "If we hand this over to the Department of Justice and to the press, there's no turning back. Your family will never forgive you." I nodded slowly, though my heart felt heavy. "I know, but Grandpa trusted me. I have to do the right thing." Steinberg closed the folder and gave a small approving nod. "Then brace yourself. A storm is coming." Within a week, the storm broke. The Harrisburg Times ran a front-page headline, "Callahan and Sons Real Estate Accused of Fraud and Money Laundering." The article cited an anonymous source who had provided detailed evidence of fake charities, offshore accounts, and collusion with officials. Within hours, the company's accounts were frozen. Police raided their offices and subpoenas arrived for both my father and Uncle Dan. The backlash was immediate. Jake called me screaming, "What have you done, Eli? You've destroyed us." Emily and Sarah filled my phone with furious messages calling me a traitor. Uncle Dan sent me a single chilling text. "You'll regret this." My father didn't call at all. Only my mother came to my apartment one evening, her eyes red from crying. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "You did the right thing, Eli, but you're going to suffer for it." She was right. The rest of the family cut me off completely. I was the outcast, the one who had burned down the empire. At the library, I tried to bury myself in work, but everywhere I went, people whispered about the scandal. On the news, my father's face appeared daily, his stern features twisted with anger as reporters hounded him outside court. Uncle Dan's slick smile was gone, replaced with fury as he battled lawsuits. The empire they had built was collapsing, and they knew I was the one who had lit the match. I told myself I had no regrets. Grandpa had trusted me, and I had honored him. Yet at night, staring at his photo on my desk, I felt an emptiness I couldn't escape. I had lost not just a family, but a part of myself. The silence of my apartment weighed on me heavier than the secrets I had uncovered. Then one morning, Steinberg called again. "Eli, you need to come to my office immediately," he said, his voice carrying a strange energy. "There's another part of your grandfather's will I haven't yet disclosed. It concerns you directly." My heart lurched. Another part of the will, I thought everything had been revealed, $10 in property, 1417. But Steinberg's tone told me this was different. When I arrived, he greeted me with a rare smile. On his desk sat a thick stack of documents. "Eli," he began, "your grandfather was an extraordinary man, and he left you something far greater than anyone else knows." I sat down slowly, my pulse pounding. "What do you mean I already found the seller, the documents, everything?" Steinberg slid the papers toward me. "This is his hidden estate." During his years with the CIA, Walter Callahan invested carefully in overseas properties, stock shares, and eventually a Silicon Valley tech company. The total value is estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars, and he left it all to you. I stared at him stunned. "Hundreds of millions," I whispered. The image of Grandpa in his worn sweater, living simply in that old wooden house, clashed violently with the numbers before me. Why didn't he tell anyone? Why live like that? Because money never mattered to him, Steinberg replied gently. He lived simply because that was who he was, but he wanted this fortune to be used for good. And he left it to you with one condition. What condition? That you establish an educational fund for underprivileged children. It was his lifelong dream, something he never had the chance to fulfill. The remainder is yours to use as you see fit, but always in accordance with the conscience he believed you possessed. I sat in silence, tears welling in my eyes. Grandpa hadn't just left me wealth, he had left me a mission, a legacy. He wanted me to continue what he could not, to change lives not with power or greed, but with opportunity. I left Steinberg's office that day in a daze, the stack of documents heavy in my hands, though the true weight was in my heart. The numbers written on those papers, hundreds of millions of dollars, didn't feel real. How could the same man who wore threadbare sweaters and lived in a creaking wooden house be one of the wealthiest men in Pennsylvania? But then I remembered his quiet smile, his afternoons spent by the fire, his words about people who lived two lives. Grandpa had lived simply because he chose to. Wealth had never been his purpose. In the days that followed, I spent hours poring over his estate papers, investments in properties across Europe, discreet accounts from his CIA years, and shares in a tech company that had exploded in value over the last decade. He had hidden it all, perhaps, to shield it from the greed of my father and uncle. And now, with them exposed for their crimes, he had left it all to me. But he hadn't left me directionless. His condition was clear: establish a fund for underprivileged children, use the fortune for good. I hired a small but trustworthy team of financial experts working quietly to set up what I named the Walter Callahan Education Fund. Every step of the process reminded me of him, his love for books, his belief in knowledge, the way he had told me stories of history, so I would understand the world. The fund became his voice, carried forward, offering scholarships, building schools, providing resources to children who might otherwise never see a classroom. Yet even as I worked to honor him, my family's anger simmered like a fire I could not escape. Jake sent me messages filled with venom, blaming me for the collapse of the Callahan name. Emily and Sarah no longer spoke to me at all. Uncle Dan's threats grew darker before the court finally silenced him. My father said nothing directly, but I could feel his hatred in the silence. The man who had always seen me as weak now knew I was the one who destroyed the empire he cherished. I had chosen truth over blood, and blood would never forgive me. Still, I pressed forward. Part of Grandpa's estate, I used to purchase a small building in downtown Harrisburg. I transformed it into a public exhibit, the secret history of a great citizen. Behind glass displays, I placed copies of declassified documents, photos of Grandpa in Berlin, and replicas of the maps and cipher notes from his notebook. I didn't reveal sensitive details, but enough for people to understand who he had been, not just a simple man in a sweater, but Falcon, the silent hero of the Cold War. The exhibit opened free to the public. On its first day, I stood by the entrance and watched as students, scholars, and families walked slowly past the displays, reading about a man they had never known, their eyes wide with awe. Some whispered, others scribbled notes, but all of them left with a piece of his story. For the first time, I felt that I had truly honored him. Months passed and the education fund grew. Children from Harrisburg and nearby towns received scholarships. A new library wing was built at the university. Letters arrived from parents thanking me for giving their kids a chance. Each time I opened one, I felt Grandpa's presence beside me, as if he were nodding in approval. One autumn afternoon, a year after his passing, I took Grandma to see the exhibit. She was weaker now, walking slowly with a cane, but her eyes lit up when she saw his name above the entrance. Inside, she paused before the large photo of him as a young man in Berlin. Her hand trembled as she touched the glass. "Your grandfather would be proud of you, Eli," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. I squeezed her hand and smiled through my own tears. I just tried to do what he asked of me, Grandma. Outside, the leaves swirled in the cool air, red and gold against the gray sky. For a moment I felt him there too, walking beside us, his hand on my shoulder just as he had done by the fireplace. He had lived 2 lives, but in the end he had trusted me with both. Life after the storm never returned to what it had been. The Callahan name, once spoken with admiration in Harrisburg's real estate circles, was now tangled with scandal. My father and Uncle Dan spent their days in courtrooms, their empire shattered, their reputations in ruins. They hired the best lawyers, fought fiercely, but the evidence Grandpa had gathered was undeniable. Even if prison never came, their world of wealth and influence was gone forever. The rest of the family had turned their backs on me. Jake, Emily, and Sarah cut me out of their lives completely. To them, I wasn't just a traitor, I was the executioner who had destroyed the Callahan legacy. My mother was the only one who remained by my side. Though she rarely spoke about my father, she would call or visit quietly, bringing groceries, or simply sitting with me in silence. Her presence reminded me that even in the darkest storms, love can survive in quiet corners. But loneliness lingered. There were nights when the apartment felt unbearably silent, when I wondered if I had done the right thing. I would open Grandpa's notebook, trace the handwriting with my fingers, and remember his last words to me. "I'm proud of you." Those words carried me through the doubt. The Walter Callahan Education Fund grew steadily. Children who once had no hope of finishing school were now entering universities. New classrooms rose in towns that had gone decades without resources. Every scholarship awarded, every library book purchased felt like planting seeds of a future Grandpa had dreamed of, but never lived to see. One evening I stood in the exhibit downtown after hours. The lights were dim, the hall quiet. Before me was a simple display, a photo of Grandpa in his sweater by the fireplace, smiling faintly. Below it was a plaque I had written, "He lived 2 lives. One the world knew, one it never did. But both were guided by truth." I thought about the family I had lost, the empire I had dismantled, and the life I had built from the ashes. I realized that truth always demands a cost, but the price of silence is far greater. Grandpa had carried his secrets for decades, unable to destroy his sons, but unwilling to let corruption continue. In the end, he trusted me to choose. I had chosen conscience over comfort, integrity over blood. As I locked the exhibit doors and stepped into the cool autumn night, I felt at peace. The Callahan name might never recover, but Grandpa's true legacy lived on not in wealth or reputation, but in the lives of children who now had a chance in the truth that could not be buried, and in the reminder that living honestly is the only way to live fully. To anyone hearing my story, I leave this: sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. Sometimes it means being hated even by those you love most. But if you hold to truth, you will never truly stand alone. Somewhere, somehow, those who came before you will walk beside you, proud of the path you chose. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps keep stories like this alive.